Turn up the dive, feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the group. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Greetings, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes. Welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and as always, I'm delighted that you're going to spend the next hour of your life with me, hopefully, if you stay until the end of the show. Whether that means you're watching live on one of the platforms that this goes out on, whether that's X or YouTube or Facebook, maybe you're watching it after that, archived on one of those channels, or perhaps you're listening to the podcast only version, the audio only version, which goes out on every podcast platform the day after. Excuse me, I had to cough there. I've had a wonderful day. I hope you all did as well. My daughter and I started the day by going to a wonderful library event. Now they have wonderful summer programs for kids, which I think is a wonderful thing up here in the North Woods near us, one of the towns closest to us. Normally, we would let our chickens out in the morning. We used to always let our chickens out early and let them do their thing. You know, we're here, on a rural property, and our roosters and our hens can run around and do whatever they want to. But we had to stop doing that for a number of predation reasons earlier in the morning. And when we're not home, there were some crazy wild dogs of the neighbors that have taken a number of chicks or chickens, not chicks, thankfully. I'm getting to that. But recently, just a couple of weeks ago, I haven't talked about this on the show yet, this appeared in my daughter's treehouse just behind our home. For those of you watching, you can probably see already on the screen, it was a bobcat, which I'm sure it would love nothing more than to have a chicken dinner. Chickens, I think, at the bottom of the food chain here in the North Woods. Every predator wants them, whether it's neighbors' dogs or bobcats or coyotes or raccoons or possums or, weasels. We've had all these things, hawks, eagles, all these things have taken our chickens over the years. So we're super cautious. So we keep our chickens locked up. I'm getting to the final part of the story. We came home to let out our chickens, and my daughter looks at me as we go over the coop, and her little eyes light up, and she says, I can hear like peeping, or I can hear chirping, and I looked at her. I didn't even say anything. My eyes lit up as well because we both knew what it meant. One of our hens had been super broody recently, and sure enough, again, if you're watching the video version, you can see there a photo of one of our barred rocks with 9 or so chicks around it. Later, we counted more. There's at least 11 in there. There might even be a dozen. So it was a wonderful day in the North Woods for me. And I guess it's related to the topic we're about to talk about tonight, because we're going to be talking about introducing children to all kinds of things. It's a great joy introducing my daughter always to like growing pumpkins and potatoes and having chickens and all the kind of joys that North Woods holds. But I also introduced her years ago to Monster Quest. In fact, it's the reason I'm on this channel now, is because I started talking to Doug Hychek, who was, of course, the creator and producer of Monster Quest, who's also the head of the Untold radio network. And I developed a friendship with him. And that was in many ways because my daughter was such a fan of his show. So we're going to get to all of these points regarding introducing kids to the weird and unusual, and how's a wholesome, healthy way of doing that, with tonight's guest, who is an author, speaker, researcher, and explorer. He's celebrated for his deep dive into the rich folklore of Wisconsin, our mutual state, which both our guest and myself live in. As the creator of Badgerland Legends and co-host of the Wisconsin Legends podcast, he brings a unique blend of storytelling and investigation to the mysteries of the Badger State. His engaging presentations have earned him invitations to speak at paranormal conferences, banquets, festivals, and conventions, where he captivates audience with tales of the unknown, forgotten history, and local legends. And I have seen him speak, and his presentations are just amazing. His latest book is Wisconsin Legends for Kids, which my daughter, who's interested in all things weird, absolutely adores. So I am so delighted to welcome back to Talking Weird my good friend, Jeff Finup. Greetings, Jeff.
Hi, Dean. Thanks so much for having me back. I'm excited to get in this topic tonight, something near and dear to my heart.
Man, it's an absolute joy to have you here. And your book, which my daughter loves, I put it up on screen now for those watching, Wisconsin Legends for Kids, is so great. So who better to talk to about introducing kids to the type of weird stuff which everybody who probably watches this show and you and I love than you? It's just great to have you here to chat about this stuff.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks for showing the book. Yeah. Just a little background about the book. On my way to school with my daughter, just about every day in the spring, she would ask me about different legends or what I was writing about. And, Wisconsin, they have a lot of dark legends, but then we have some, lighthearted, more uplifting ones. So I kind of had to cherry pick those and, tell her only the happy ones, even if they were about the Beast of Bray Road, which is a ferocious beast that wanders the Badger State, or, the fearsome hodag of the Northwoods. But, we could put a little shiny veneer on it, make it a little digestible and a little less scary for kids. So I put pen to paper and was able to come up with the book, and she was just tickled to receive it. So I really appreciate you sharing it with your audience.
Well, it's so great. As I mentioned in my intro, my daughter was, in fact, her gateway, I think, was dinosaurs. And when I knew she was fascinated with dinosaurs, I thought initially, well, if she's interested in aquatic reptiles, the plesiosaur and that type of stuff, she's gonna like Loch Ness Monster. Like that's what I loved when I was a kid. I had a little plesiosaur, model dinosaur back in the days when there were probably about 20 dinosaurs anybody knew about. Now there's hundreds. Like my daughter can rattle off so many. But I had a little plesiosaur I used to play with in the bath, and I thought of that as the Loch Ness Monster because I was a kid of the 70s, and I grew up on In Search of and the like. Anyway, long story short, I knew, well, she's going to like Loch Ness Monster stuff. And sure enough, and we started watching that. And then it doesn't take long to segue into Bigfoot. And we got into Monster Quest, and she loved Monster Quest. Like she'd asked to watch it all the time. And I think I had Doug Hychek on. I can't even remember what the order was, if I contacted him first or I had him on Talking Weird first. But anyway, I told him my daughter's like the biggest fangirl of your show. And that was really, I think, probably the real stepping off point for my friendship with Doug. And he was very kind. He sent all this stuff for Chloe, and then eventually I came over to the Untold radio network. But anyway, so tell us a little bit more about your engagement with your children with this type of
material. So just to kind of back up and talk about your daughter's entrees through dinosaurs. I remember having a friend when I was probably about 7 or 8. He was next door neighbor, and he was totally geeked out about dinosaurs. And he kind of showed me his dinosaur collection, showed me some of his books, and then he said, "Hey Jeff, do you know that there's a real dinosaur that's still living?" And then he told me about Nessie, and I think his mom had one of those old Time Life books, and he opened to the page and showed me that famous picture of the of Nessie emerging from Loch Ness. And we had hatched plans to, when we grew up, to get boats and helicopters and drag Loch Ness and try to capture Nessie as a youngster would. And that was probably my first entree into the world of cryptozoology. And at the time in the late 80s, we were ripe for it with Bigfoot on every it seemed like every popular sitcom or adventure show on TV. They had like one Bigfoot episode where the main characters would go and have an encounter with Bigfoot or try to track him down. And oh, and don't forget about Swamp Thing. That was definitely kind of a cryptid in itself. But yeah, getting back to your original question about introducing my kids to this, just the walks with my daughter to school and really going through that and just kind of sparking the sense of wonder in her and asking her really what she thought about it, kind of getting her perspective. So at least, if I could start with her perspective, then I could kind of, help her understand things better, whether it was like the spiritual world, whether it was ghosts, or, what she thought of the Hodag story, or whether she thought a werewolf type creature was roaming the Badger State down in the southeast quadrant of the state. And it was always fun to get her reaction to this thing. And, I even had a rank order. I said, well, if one of these has to exist, what do you think? Bigfoot, ghosts, or UFOs, like aliens? And she gave her reason why she thought something existed. I think Bigfoot was actually at the bottom of her list of things that existed, but it was cute to just kind of have those conversations with her and, maybe destigmatize something that could be a scary thing, like a ghost walking into your room, or a monster under your bed or in your closet. So that's really where it started for me. And now my little guy, he's about 5.5, and he's really taking an interest in this. So I'm trying to kind of help him along his way. Introduced him to Monster Quest, because I know you mentioned with your daughter that she really liked it. He liked the first half of the Beast of Bray Road episode, but it does seem to get a little academic, so wasn't quite able to grok everything that they were dishing out. But he really enjoyed the visuals and the storytelling that the eyewitnesses reported.
Doug's told me in the past that often he has no longer kids, people who are, I guess, in their 20s, because the show came out like, a decade or two ago initially, right? Like a decade ago. When is anyway? So it's a while back, and they say, I'm doing a science degree, a biology degree, because I was a Monster Quest kid. So it has an impact on kids in that way. It's funny. I was speaking about introducing your kids in a soft way. We have all kinds of legends in this part of the world, as you know, but there's in two different Linda Godfrey books. In one Linda Godfrey book, there's I think Weird, Wisconsin. There's a tale about a Bigfoot that was seen very close to here. And when I first moved here, I was like reading, it was between this town and this town. I'm like, well, I'm directly between those two towns. And then I went and I went, that's like just around the corner. And when I was driving home, literally just the other day, I'm like, to my daughter, I'm like, that's where Bigfoot was seen, just up there. She's like, really? I'm like, yeah, Bigfoot was seen there. And he was following the creeks, of course, or the creeks. He was walking along the waterways. And we have another story in another Linda Godfrey book, in one of her Dogman or werewolf books, about a farmer driving into a town right near us back in the 50s and jumping out in total hysteria at like the gas station or the feed store or wherever he pulled into, and saying there's a wolf the size of a horse running around my property.
Wow. Yeah, that could have been an early sighting of the Beast of Bray Road.
It could be a related thing, but Wisconsin's weird. See, when I grew up in Australia, I loved any kind of legend I could get a hold of, but there was
Mhm.
nothing like a Bigfoot, like, just up the road, and, like, the closest town to me, a farmer who drove in there in a panic because 'cause he'd seen essentially the creature from American Werewolf in London, you know what I mean? So, now I feel like I'm really living there, so I think my daughter has become, enculturated in these things. But your book is a great actual, entry point or gateway, and a safe entry point and gateway, I think, because you can't scare kids, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's fun to be scared in a cute way, like, oh, but you don't want to. There's a difference between, I think, introducing a kid to the idea of cryptids and introducing a kid to the idea that there's something that's going to tear you apart. Do you know what I mean? But
Mm.
your book is very good at, I think, presenting these kind of mysteries and legends in Wisconsin, and without leaving any real room for nightmares or terror.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just being able to head up to Rhinelander a couple weeks ago, that was the first time that the kids got to go up there, and we were invited into the Rhinelander Logging Museum right there at the Pioneer Park. And good friend Carrie Bladern was nice enough to show us around and just kind of see how the world worked about 100 years ago. When um, it was probably 150 years ago now, when Rhinelander was in its heyday of logging and lumbering, and then the folklore that spawned out of that. And he's done a great job of mixing the history with the folklore, and just being kind of able to show them that side, that this is how the people lived, and this was one of the things that roamed the woods. And could you imagine yourself in a dark woods and seeing something like this? What would you do? And just kind of getting the kids' reactions, and seeing their little wheels turn is just a gift in itself.
Yeah, and you know what? I do think some children are more, because I obviously we're all very different the way we're psychologically made up. Everybody is. I think some children are better able to cope with scary things, and they even can like scary things. Like my girlfriend Sam, who you've met when we were both
Mhm.
the Milwaukee Paracon. Thanks to you for encouraging the book me to do my shaver talk last year. But my daughter, who also, she has your book as well, by the way, and she really loves it too. My girlfriend's daughter, that is, she is a little older than my daughter, but she's fascinated with ghosts and the paranormal and super creepy stuff. I've always been a little more reluctant. Like, I don't think Bigfoot and Nessie and cryptozoology stuff is necessarily that scary, but the paranormal, I think, can be quite scary. I know when I was a little kid, that was the scariest stuff to me. I had a book called, I think it was a British company called Usborne, and it had like, they had 3 books. They had Book of Ghosts, Book of Monsters, and Book of UFOs or something. But I had the hardcover which collected them all, and the scariest one was the Book of Ghosts. Like, the paranormal stuff can be super scary. My daughter's girlfriend isn't my girlfriend's daughter, rather, isn't scared of paranormal at all. Like, she loves it. She wants to go legend tripping to all the, like, ghosty sites in this state. But is that something you've been more conscious of with your kids as well, that there are some things which seem to be scarier than other things? I know I have been.
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned this, because just last night when I was putting my son to bed, we tuck him in. Both me and my wife go in independently, and sing him a song, and wish him good night. And just last night, he's like, "Dad, I feel like there's a monster in my room." And my wife is like, "Oh man, how do we deal with this?" I'm like, "You know what? I'm going to be talking to Dean about this tomorrow night." So uh, my wife got a quick idea, and she said, "Well, Dad's going to bring up some monster spray, and he's going to take care of the monsters." So I grabbed a little spray bottle that you use for, houseplants or wetting your hair or whatnot. And I took it up to his room, and I kept the lights off. And I said, "I got the special monster spray here." And I sprayed it in each of the cardinal directions. And I said, "All right, Ian," I said, "I sprayed the monster spray. No monsters are allowed to enter here." And then he was like, "Oh, thanks, Dad." And he says, "But what about ghosts?" So I said, "Well, you know, I don't think you have to worry much about ghosts. And then I said, you know what you need to say is, this is my room. This is where I belong, and you're not welcome here. So I got him to kind of take some ownership of his room, and I gave him some agency. And then after saying, this is my room, I feel safe here, and this is where I belong. And he was able to fall right back asleep. And then tonight, the same thing kind of happened. He's like, "Dad, what about the monsters?" I said, "Well, remember when I sprayed for monsters yesterday? Yeah, it's like magic. It just keeps on working. So you got nothing to worry about." And he was able to just kind of doze off to sleep without any more issues. So I think just kind of adding another kind of mythology or another modality of thinking, even if it is a little fantastical, it certainly helps psychologically. And I think it really helped him feel safe and secure. So I think the quick hack my wife came up with, it seemed to be effective. I guess I'll have to report back in a month if it persists.
I think no, I do think that's a great approach. When I was a child, I had night terrors, I think, and I had sleep paralysis, and I had bedroom visitations, which I've talked about elsewhere extensively. And whether that was psychological or whether there was a genuine phenomenological explanation outside of myself, like whether there was something external going on for some of it. Most of it, I think, can probably be explained psychologically, perhaps all of it. But I I often wonder if a lot of childhood's night terrors of today or the last 100 or 200 years aren't a result of a trend in modern and I guess postmodern parenting in that the child gets put in a dark room and the door gets closed and it's good night, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite, and boom, that's it. Well, traditionally, culturally, as a species, we were like the chickens I'm talking about, the little chicks that popped out today. They're living under their mummy at the moment. They're sleeping under her right now, and they'll be near their mummy until they're essentially, teenagers, really.
Mhm.
But I wonder if a lot of these things which are scary to children are because there's an unnatural disconnect which we didn't have when we lived in pre-modernity. Like if you were living in a village community, 500 years ago, you weren't being put in a separate room with a door closed and the lights out. You were sleeping next to your parents, really.
Yeah, essentially, you were all in the same room with a fire blazing as everybody kind of drifted off to sleep as the fire slowly died. You fell into a sleep, and then if you woke up, it's like, well, there's my dad, there's my mom. I feel safe, and I was able to go back to sleep. But yeah, I think it is an unnatural environment that we put kids into now, and obviously, we have to deal with modernity for modernity's sake, and you know, come up with creative coping mechanisms to give our kids the ability to cope with what the situation is.
No, I think that's a good point. Unless perhaps we really are visited at night by things. And listen, I'm not even being facetious.
uh,
Like, there's a part of me because of my experiences as a child that I wonder if there are things that don't creep in to bedrooms at night. And that sounds insane. Like, this is nothing I could have ever written about academically, but I wonder if there isn't something to the idea of a child alone in a room in the darkness if something doesn't manifest perhaps, or know there's an innocence there that it can come and creep into and disturb.
I mean, when are you the most vulnerable? You're either in the shower, on the toilet, or you're asleep in your bedroom. So any of those three options, you know, the famous film Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock, the shower scene there, the most vulnerable. You're naked. You're in your bed. You're in your bedclothes. Sometimes as little as your underwear, and you're asleep. You don't have any means to protect you. So if there was something, that's of course when they would find a time. And I tell you, the nighttime visitors or the bedtime visitors are the things that still kind of give me goosebumps or chills up my spine when I think about that, because you are so vulnerable. And waking up next to something at the foot of your bed or at the side of your bed or laying next to you are the thing of nightmares. So I think even as an adult, I could see how children, feeling vulnerable, could definitely play.
We have a question for you from Horace Smith, who is a professor emeritus of astronomy and physics at Michigan State University. He's been a guest on the show and is a good friend of mine and a good friend of the show. And Horace asks, how does the guest book deal with the issue of skepticism versus belief? That can be a hard question for adults. Can children understand the issue? Good question, Horace.
Yeah, that's great. So pretty much how I laid out the book, it's probably each legend is only a few paragraphs, and I just lay out what happened on a date, whether it's historical and the story behind it, and I don't really lend any specific judgment to whether it is real or fake or if it's just legend. And kind of the realm I play in is, where does historical fact meet story? And that's kind of where I think the sweet spot is, and I think that's what generates the most wonder for kids. So I would say that there's no real value judgment as something is real or fake, and I kind of let the kids decide. And I encourage the kids to go to each of these places, whether it's the Burlington Vortex, or, speaking of the chickens, Chicken Alley, or go up to Rhinelander and see if they can spot a hodag, or go down to Bray Road, drive down there with your parents to see if you can spot anything amongst the farm fields, or talk to some people that may have experienced something like that. So I don't uh, I don't put a value judgment on it, and I'll let the young readers decide, or have them talk to their parents and have a discussion about. So I think it's more of a conversation starter for kids, and also a way to kind of almost like a field guide to different legends which exist in Wisconsin.
Talking about going on vacation might be the wrong term, but on trips to go and
Mhm.
see these kind of spaces. Have you done that? Have you done what's called, I guess, legend tripping is the term, right? Have you done that with your children at all, or is that something that you plan on doing with them at all?
Not in a real formal sense. I know Chad Lewis, he put together a great book about paranormal dares of the Midwest, which is awesome. And one of them was Chicken Alley, which I used for my book. And I think another one was Kate Blood's Gravestone. And, he encourages people to go out and experience it for themselves. I have not done that in a formal setting quite yet. I know there was a story that cropped up in David Weatherly's latest book about Wisconsin monsters. And I had never heard the story. And then I'm like, wow, that is within 5 miles of my house. And it was a
Wow.
story about a man that they believed was a werewolf. It started with a murder of a farmer in it was 1840s Wisconsin. So this was before statehood, or right around the official statehood of Wisconsin. And people suspected that the assailant, Jacob Gross, was a werewolf. And you could go to this cemetery called the Coleman Cemetery and see that victim of one of the first murders in the area, Charles Coleman. And just beyond it was actually an iron cross. That is his grave marker. Just beyond that, you could see the stone obelisk that belonged to Jacob Gross, which was the alleged murderer, and a guy that was actually set free. He was charged. He was tried. The I believe the trial only lasted about 3 days, and the jury came back in only 45 minutes and issued a not guilty verdict against Jacob Gross, when it seemed like the preponderance of evidence was against Jacob Gross. And people say that Jacob Gross was actually a werewolf, and people were afraid of reprisal if they had convicted him of murder. Well, that's the legend, but actually being able to go put boots on the ground, find Charles Coleman's his grave marker, that cross, and see just over what, almost looking over the shoulder of that cross, was Jacob Gross's. Kind of gave me goosebumps. I don't think my my son, who was not quite 5 at the time,
Yeah, right.
really quite understood, but he's like, "A werewolf is buried here?" And that was enough to get his curiosity, but I think as they grow older, we can do more of those official legend trips, and I think I'd really look forward to that.
I mean, I love the idea of legend tripping more with Chloe when she gets older. My daughter has obviously been a major part of my documentary, The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers. She's in a number of scenes, and she's, traveled around the country and the state with me to various Palmer and Shaver orientated locations. But I don't think that visiting places which are related to people who were involved with creating a mythology is as interesting as going to places where the mythology itself actually took place for a kid. As a quick aside, one of my favorite paranormal shows of all time, probably the only show I actually love more is In Search Of. Like In
Mhm.
Search Of, the great show of the '70s and early '80s with Leonard Nimoy as the presenter, is still, I think, the greatest paranormal show ever made. It's creepy, it's weird, it has the gravitas of Leonard Nimoy. It was meant to have the gravitas of Rod Serling with some of the early pilot stuff, which would have been
That'd been
equally impressive.
fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're both incredible. But other than that, I my favorite paranormal show of all time only ran for 1 season, and that's The Low Files. And that's because it isn't because I'm a big Rob Lowe fanboy, even though he's great. I'm not a particularly fanboy really of, necessarily of any, heartthrob celebrity, but the nature of that show about a father with his 2 sons when they're kind of, in their when they've hit their teens, or they're, I don't know, they're probably their mid to late teens, going and investigating the unusual together. It's such a great concept for a television show. Like, and the show is so wonderful. It should have ran for more than a season. Like, and I think because now that as a father, I think I appreciate that show so much.
Yeah, I haven't seen that show. I've seen clips of it, and it seems like the 2 Low boys, they end up giving Rob a hard time about a lot of stuff, and I kinda like to see, Rob Lowe, it seems like he takes himself pretty seriously to see his sons kind of, get a few jabs at him, that just kind of, makes me feel like I do around my kids, like, like, "What do you know, dad?" And it's like, "Well, I've been on this earth a lot longer than you, but" just seeing that kind of camaraderie is I love that.
No, I think you really would. You'd love that show a lot. Back to the werewolf thing though quickly, and it's a little bit of an aside, I guess, from our conversation about approaching the paranormal and legends and lore with kids. Why do
Mhm.
you think that these werewolf and dogman stories and the Beast of Bray Road and that type of story is so prevalent where we are in Wisconsin and perhaps in Michigan as well? Why does this seem to be like the heart of these? And I know people say they see them all over America now, but this really was the stepping off point and really still, I think, remains the heart of dogman country, really, where, you know, this part of the northern Midwest.
Yeah, it's really wild how the dog man phenomenon blew up, because it started, either I think it really came into relevance in northern Michigan. And I know there was that one hoax video that was said was found in the 70s at a garage sale or whatever. But I think, the Beast of Bray Road stuff in the early 90s also really brought it to a national attention. And of course, Linda Godfrey, without her in this field, I mean, I think a lot of people would be lost. But as far as the phenomenology of it, I've pondered this, and I remember going to Lee Hample's. He is kind of the modern custodian of the Bray Road lore, having his farm, which backs right up to Bray Road on Bowers Road, and being able to invite different investigators or TV crews out to roam his property and see if they can have an encounter with the beast. I got to spend some time with Lee in his barn, look over his evidence, and one of the people I was there with, Josh Hughes of Waukesha Ghost Walks, he said, this feels very Native American. And I think the preponderance of so many mounds in this area of the state and this part of the Midwest. I think there is something to that. I know there's the stories of the Anubis of is that Egyptian mythology, being kind of the protector of the realm between the living and the dead. I think that kind of strikes a chord. I know there's a lot of stories about, whether it was the early Shackleton encounter in the at the Catholic convent near Jefferson, where the beast was perched upon an earthen Indian mound and actually clawing at the ground, maybe trying to escape back to whence it came into that mound. I think that may be kind of the fuel for that. And I know also in the German, this specific um, cemetery that we visited was a German cemetery, Coleman, Gross, and they were German immigrants to Wisconsin and farmers. And I know there's a lot of werewolf lore in that Germanic area that they may have transported over here, whether the phenomenon followed them or just the mythology. I guess we'll never know, but I think that would be uh, my best guess.
I think that's a good point, whether it is just because of a cultural orientation of the people who first, immigrated here from Europe, or whether it has to do with the thing coming with them. And I think you can look at similar things regarding where fairy faiths traveled around the world,
Mhm.
where there's been Irish populations. Is it because the Irish population bought the stories, or is it because the phenomenon followed
Yeah.
the Irish population to those places? And maybe that's something we really can't answer.
Yeah, and there was a great story that just kind of popped in my mind of when you mentioned Irish and folklore. And there's a story in near Ridgeway where the Ridgeway Phantom exists, and it's actually the Mill Creek, which kind of intersects Ridgeway. And there's a really cool old water wheel there, and it said that a hermit haunts that. And when looking at the origins of that, it was the Mill Creek Hermit, and apparently it came over from Ireland in either a trunk, suitcase, or a whiskey bottle. And I really like kind of that wrinkle of the whiskey bottle, like a stowaway spirit in a whiskey bottle that somehow incarnated into a hermit and then I guess disincarnated into the spirit of the hermit that haunts that mill. And I just like that each culture, especially with Wisconsin, there's so many different European cultures that came over here and settled early, and each region of the state has their own kind of local flavor and the lore, because these were the folk people of those areas. They were the peasant class, and they were kind of the custodians of all of this folklore. And just to hear different things from different parts of the state and how it relates to the culture is I think that's really intriguing, and how they kind of contextualize the quote unquote other is a lot of fun.
No, I agree. And speaking about people who were custodians of the law, you've kind of either taken or had that position thrust upon you yourself. Like, you seem to be somebody who is one of the key holders of Wisconsin law now, like of the legends of this place and the stories of this place. And you do an incredible job of collecting them. Is that is there a weight to that? Like, are you conscious of, oh, now I have to I have to keep people remembering these, or I have to somehow preserve,
Well,
this.
as long as we protect Chad Lewis with our lives, I don't think I have to take on that big of a responsibility. And you know, the old adage about standing on the shoulders of giants. There's been so many great folklorists, even before Chad and Linda of Wisconsin lore, that I just look at, like, maybe these stories don't belong to me, but it's definitely my time. And just trying to take different things from different parts of the state and being able to kind of repackage them for modern audiences, whether it's in a modern form like an Instagram reel or a Facebook post. I think that's just the way the lore is being transmitted. And I just think, like, Well, it's my job to, since I'm such an enthusiast of this stuff, to bring it forward in, the most, the modern way of storytelling, which is, more of social media. I think that's just kind of the avenue that I found worked best for, transmitting these stories.
I think you do a really good job of presenting those stories on social media, and you avoid the the clickbait simplification of so many stories. It's funny, Brian Emmerich, who is a very good friend of mine. He's an incredibly talented musician and sound engineer, and he's also the world's leading collector of Shaver ephemera and Richard Shaver artwork. Anybody who's a regular listener to the show knows I'm making a documentary about Ray Palmer and Richard Shaver and the Shaver mystery and the creation of modern UFO belief. But he sent me as a joke the other day some TikTok type 30-second or 1 minute clip of like the Shaver mystery and said, we don't have to worry about making the documentary anymore because he's a producer. Well, just watch this. And it was horrible. Like, there's this sense that you can summarize something in a minute and you've achieved something. But there's a lessening when people do that. And that isn't what you do. You do very like thorough stories and other things when you present stuff. But when you're talking about presenting things now in this, I don't even know if it's Web 2.0 or it's Web 3.0 or Web whatever it is now. But are you conscious of trying to avoid that? And is it something that annoys you as somebody who collects and compiles and saves these stories, that there are people out there doing 30-second or 1 minute clips explaining to put it in a Wisconsin cryptid or legend context, I don't know, the Beast of Bray Road or the Joe Simonton pancake case, like these really short clips that try to like encapsulate it all.
The was it Marshall McLuhan that said the medium is the message? And I often think about that in the back of my mind, and I try not to be too clickbaity, but we live in an attention economy, so that is something that I'm cognizant of. So usually, if it is something like that, I try to hook it with like a short video, and then if you're intrigued enough, I'll give you the text and I'll give you the rest of the story. As Paul said famously. So it's been kind of a tightrope act. With, I think if I were to go full clickbaity, 60-second quick cuts, I'd probably be a lot more popular. But I think that would also dilute the message of what I'm trying to transmit. So I think I found a great middle ground. And I actually look forward to the days that I have the time to do more long form content. But for me, it's been just being able to scratch an itch and being able to create one piece or transmit one story, per day, through, give somebody something that they didn't know about a place like Wisconsin that they do. I think that's been really my goal and really kind of the driving force, or kind of, the North Star of creating the content that I do. And it almost cheapens it to even say that word. I hate that, creating content, but
Yeah,
I mean, it is what it is. But it's always fun. I think if you can give the most thorough representation of a story, without being too wordy, and capture somebody's attention, maybe they're going to be the next person to look deeper into that. Maybe they're going to take that one story I tell them and make it into a longer work, whether it's a book or an article or, a deep dive into a podcast. So I think everything kind of has its place, and, I just can do what I can do to, as much integrity as I can do it with.
and you do an incredible job. I'm always
Thank you for that.
no, I'm serious. Whenever anything pops up from you in my feed, like I'm like, wow, and the state just seems stranger and weirder and creepier every time I read something from you, which I like, which I like. But maybe just to flash back quickly to our initial subject matter, because I'm happy to chase down all kinds of weird with you. as a parent who's A, written a book about this, but B, talked to your children about it as well at length, what kind of advice would you give to parents who might want to introduce their children to ideas of, like, maybe they wanna go legend tripping, or maybe they wanna read them stories about Bigfoot, or maybe they wanna watch shows about UFOs with them? Like, what kind of advice would you give for the approach for parents who wanna do that?
I think kids are often interested in what parents are interested in. And I think, just talking to children, one thing that I see a lot of parents do is they'll talk to their kids like they're little kids. They'll kind of quote code switch and talk in like baby voice. That's not something we ever did with kids. And we've always talked. My wife she's going for a PhD. She's highly educated. So we never really structured our language or talked down to them. We just used the words that we used. And my daughter's incredibly bright and used a huge vocabulary. But to kind of give back to that point, there is just kind of meeting the kids where they're at, showing them your interest, saying something in a more simple way. Well, some people say that this happened here. What do you think about that? And just engaging them, getting their ideas, and then kind of leading the conversation. Well, what do you think about this? What would you rather do? Be abducted by an alien or have breakfast with Bigfoot? Or would you rather go spend the night in a haunted mansion or in out under the stars? And just kind of getting their reasoning behind that and just kind of stoking that sense of wonder in them. And I think the more you talk about it, the more you can make plans. Hey, remember when I told you the story about that? Like you said, with seeing that original article that Linda had in Weird Wisconsin. Hey, Chloe, check that out. That's where Bigfoot was seen. And then you can have that conversation with her. And I think kids are more receptive if you have a natural interest in it, and also if you do it from a place of neutrality without trying to cast too much of stigma or to trying to scare them too much, just being like, yeah, this is just part of our world. And what do you think about that? Do you think this really exists? Do you think this happened here? What do you think was really? Some people say this is the simple explanation, and kind of give them the debunking perspective, and then maybe just holding one thing back. Well, if that was easily debunked, what do you think about this fact? It just kind of introducing into it in more inquisitive manner and having them ask questions about this definitely keeps the conversation going. And I think it helps their little minds work and kind of work out the details. And every once in a while, I'll tell them something and I will get no response from them. And then about a week later, they'll be like, "Hey, Dad, remember when you told me about this? What do you think about this explanation?" And I'll just be like, "Oh, that is great. Great thinking there." Just I think just by having the conversation on their level without holding back or being too sensationalized, I think definitely helps get those conversations. And just seeing how their minds work is definitely the best approach I found.
No, it's lovely to see your child think things through. I'm also a big believer in romantic traditions, so I do love having my child's life filled with fairies and mystery and Bigfoot and just the wonders which tend to evaporate way too quickly today.
Yeah.
And I think they've evaporated way too quickly for a number of decades now. Do you think though that there are dangers with introducing children to paranormal topics? Like are there things, whether psychologically or genuinely spiritually, or are there problems with any of this, do you think?
I think it can be introduced in a safe manner. I think maybe taking your kids to some place where something heinous happened, whether, it was a killing or a murder, like I'm not going to put my kids in the attic of the Villisca Axe murder house. I'm going to introduce things that are pretty banal, that don't put them in harm's way, either physically, psychologically, or spiritually. And I think that's probably the best way to do it. I'm not going to bust out the Ouija board and do a seance. I don't think that, there's stigma attached to that, and there's a lot of, psychic energy that we can give into that, which could be, harmful, whether, spiritually or just psychologically. So I
Agree.
think it's just kind of knowing your child, knowing what they're interested in, what scares them, and either putting a little more light onto it, like I did with my son with the monster spray, and just kind of being like, okay, I'm not going to tell you that monsters don't exist. I'm not going to tell you that ghosts don't exist, because I don't think that is helpful. Because I think that almost creates a sense of doubt in them, and I don't think that that's constructive. I think being able to deal with it on its own terms has been a better course of action, at least for me. I can only speak from my experience.
No, I agree. I remember even in the period that my daughter was watching Monster Quest, she woke up one night in the middle of the night, not with night terrors, but with a nightmare, which my daughter never had. She was never a child who woke up scared. And she was scared. And I said to her, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Ghosts." And she'd watched Ghostbusters with her
Mm.
mummy um, only recently. And I think the paranormal aspect had been something which had been disturbing. And I kind of, again, I understand that because as a child, that paranormal aspect scared me probably more than the idea of a UFO or a Bigfoot or a Loch Ness monster did. But we have a question. We have a question from the Dead End Collective, and I'll let you address this, Jeff. He says, "Do children absorb and reflect what their parents absorb and reflect? And if so, what does it mean for authenticity? Because I come from this from a psychological point of view. Can you expand on this?"
Oh man, I wish I was qualified to give that a great answer. Yeah, I don't know. I know my kids, they absorb just about everything we throw at them, and when they do reflect it, it is something that fits their psychological state at the time. And I think that, as far as a harm, or uh, I wish I knew more about that. But like I said earlier, I'd never put them in the harm's way, whether it's physical, psychological, or spiritually. And I think that's kind of the best approach I found. I know some people who will take their kids on paranormal investigations where people had died or something like that. I'm just like, they're not ready for that. Or if they want to do that, when they're in their late teens or something like that, maybe that's more of the time. But do you have anything to add on that, or your perspective?
I mean, I do think that children are going to be influenced and absorb their parents' interests. But I agree with you as far as I'm very reluctant to introduce my daughter to things which well I think it's all paranormal to a degree. I think how do we separate the physical from the non-physical, and whether it's Bigfoot or UFOs or sightings of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's I think it's all fits the same pattern. That's my Keelian perspective. But I think for a little kid, things like ghosts and paranormal reality, only because I'm looking from my own place when I was a child, I do think that's more scary, as I mentioned before. So my daughters never seem to be scared of Bigfoot or scared of the Loch Ness monster. I don't think those things are inherently scary, but
Mhm.
I think the idea of the way that death or the way that the afterlife or the way that spirits are presented on any of those type of reality shows that deal with those kind of things, I think they're innately scary, just the way they're presented culturally. Whether they're
Mhm.
scary or not objectively is another story altogether, but the way that they're presented, the things which wrap around those ideas, I think we have to be I think we have to be very careful about it. When we talk about psychology and, a psychological point of view like the Dead End Collective was talking about, I think that you can damage little psyches if you start, talking about, oh, this person's dead and here's the ghost of, whatever. And I mean, compare an average Monster Quest show to an average Ghost Adventure show. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah. The
Like, it's
ghost venturization of the modern media. I mean, I think it started, all the way back with like Most Haunted, where Derek Okoro was getting possessed or channeling an entity or whatever every time he did a seance or whatnot. I don't think that's helpful for kids, and that's something I've tried to shy away from. Is the more um, I guess the word would be sensational aspect. I don't think that is something helpful, especially with kids under 10. If in their teens, then maybe, that's something more appropriate. But I think sensationalism, like I said, with it creating content, it's like, yeah, no kidding. That stuff gets a lot more clicks. It gets a lot of more eyeballs because of its nature. But I think like we alluded to earlier with the developing psyches of kids, I think you do have to definitely treat that with kid clubs, no pun intended.
Have your children, and this is somewhat of a personal question, but have your children ever had night terrors or anything like that? I know that you mentioned your son going to bed was like, you know, concerned about ideas, and you seemed very good at being able to kind of placate those fears by talking
Mhm.
about, spraying the place with a monster spray and things, which I think is great, by the way. But have they ever had any night terrors or sleep
Yeah,
paralysis?
long before, we had discussed any of this stuff with my daughter, she had recurrent night terrors, maybe like once every 2 months, where she would wake up and be unconsolable. And it's something that no parent wants to face, the sheer terror in a child overnight. But it seemed to, with age, lessen and lessen. And uh, I think there was a physical component to that. It was before she had her tonsil and adenoidectomy. So I think a lot of times sleep apnea can be a trigger for things like sleep paralysis. So I think once we kind of took care of a lot of her medical issues, a lot of that resolved. So it wasn't necessarily something psychological. It was actual a physical ailment that she worked through, and that we got the medical advice and medical intervention for, and it seemed to have resolved. She sleeps a lot better now. So I think that's one thing. Everybody's kind of a complex unit, and we have to look at things holistically. And I think that's something a lot of us in this field, whether it's a what you call Keelian or Fortean, we looked at things as holistic, and I think that needs to be approached that way.
That Yeah, that's it. You seem to be such a great parent. I know when I was a child, my parents were great as well, but it was a different period. So I think that the night terrors and the panics I had, and whether whatever a bedroom visitation means, I think it was just the nature of having a child back then. I don't think there was any real deep and meaningful thought about it. It was just my kid woke up scared and screaming in the middle of the
Mhm.
night. So maybe we'll carry him into our bed, or maybe we won't, or we'll try to placate him briefly. But
Mhm.
I don't think there was any deep thought in those days.
No, and I think, it's a lot of things like that in childhood is something that kids go through phases like that where they may wake up and have night terrors, or may be fully awake in the middle of the night and be scared in their room. And it just something as a good parent being, conscious of that and being able to address it with a calming tone. And, whether you got to get out the monster spray and take care of that, or create your own mythology around how we've dealt with this in the past as parents or when we were little kids, and kind of pass that along to give them better peace of mind.
Well, you do seem like an awesome parent, Jeff.
Thank you, as do you, Dean.
Well, well, thank you. I'm sure we have everybody probably has slightly different parenting methods, but I think the important thing is to actually be concerned about your children and to keep the imagination alive, which I think we both do. I think that's so important today. I think it's lost an awful lot today. I don't think there are. Forget about worrying about your children having night terrors or not. I think the idea of sustaining the magic of childhood
Mhm.
for as long as we possibly can.
Yeah,
Not
and
sure
and
how
it's
long.
fleeting. I know we both have daughters about the same age, and you can see, year over year, how much of that that wonder they kind of slough off as they get to the real world or adolescence, and just trying to hold on to that, and um, I don't think it's helpful to be dismissive of any of this stuff. It's to engage with it on its own terms and work through with it, and then as they become older and have better ideas about this stuff and having more grown up conversations.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to talk to my daughter um, when we can talk at a level, I suppose, of, yeah, maybe when she's a teenager, to talk about the real, her real beliefs and thoughts
Mhm.
about it. I think now I just like to keep it like imaginal and fun,
Yeah, I
again.
think that's probably a great way to end it. Imaginal and fun. Don't stigmatize it. Don't sensationalize it. Just kind of meet the kids where they are. Um, yeah, couldn't have said it any better.
Well, you say all kinds of things probably better than I do, Jeff, including in your wonderful book, Wisconsin Legends for Kids, which I encourage anybody who has a child or a nephew or a niece or their friend has a child who's interested in this kind of stuff, or you think might be interested in this kind of stuff, or who's just a child. Because if I had this book in my palms when I was a child, I would have adored it. Can you throw out some URLs, firstly for the book, or suggest where people go to get it, and
Yeah,
also then for where they can keep up with what you're up to?
yeah. Easiest place, Wisconsin Legends for Kids. Just drop that in your search bar on Amazon. Be the first thing that comes up. So I really appreciate the plug on that. And then if you want to connect with me, Badgerland Legends on Instagram and Badgerland Legends on Facebook. Badgerland Legends Jeff is my handle or my personal account on Facebook. Drop me a friend request, drop me a message. I'm always intrigued to hear about legends I don't know. I've covered over 1,000 of them since I took on this project in 2020. So I'm always looking for that one I missed, or getting a new wrinkle on an old legend. So if you got something, I really have a thirst for it. So I appreciate the plug and the opportunity to share that with you, Dean.
Well, it was a great show with you, as it always is. And we have to talk, which we've been talking about a little bit in personal chat recently. We have to talk about the whole Joe Simonton pancake affair in Wisconsin, the
Yes.
the farmer who was visited by aliens who made pancakes, and how that spiraled into one of the hottest contentions of 1960s ufology, with the division between NICAP and
Mhm.
Ray Palmer, who I'm obsessed with, because there's a story in there. So that's perhaps a show for another time.
It is, and it is absolutely one of my favorites. And then when you can come to me with another unique angle that I had not heard of, the NICAP and the Ray Palmer thing, I'm always intrigued to learn more specifically about that legend, just because that one I think is such a broad scope of everything across the paranormal, and I think it deserves a longer treatment. It's something I've had in the back of my brain to do a longer project on that, but it just seems like whenever I think I know everything about that case, Dean hits me with something else.
Well, that's just because I spent all my time thinking about Ray Palmer and Richard Schaefer and don't do anything else. Jeff, it was an incredible joy to have you back on the show. It always is. Thank you so much for
Thanks for having me again.
and until I get to talk to you again, Jeff, and until I get to talk to everybody else out there, thank you again, Jeff. And please keep it weird.
Stay legendary.